here to do the Badass Short Story Tag with Leonardo da Vinci. It was created by Strip Cover Lit. I'll link the original video down in the description below. So yeah, let's get started. So number 1 is 5 Grotesque Heads. A sketch by Da Vinci. The extreme vision and artistry leave the audience gasping, grasping, and wishing for a fuller piece. So what is one short story you wish were a novel? And that is going to come from James Baldwin's collection, Going to Meet the Man. And the story is Sonnys Blues, which is, it's a great story if you've never read it. I highly suggest reading all of these. But Sonnys Blues is about 2 brothers who are African American and live in Harlem. One kind of has his life together, and the others, I think he just got out of it. It's been a while since I read it, but he just gotten out of jail and is like a jazz musician, and it's kind of them trying to understand each other and the motivations each other has through getting through life in their particular way. It's a really brilliant story by one of America's most brilliant and notoriously underrated writers. So I highly suggest reading it, but I think it would make a really good novel. 1, because Baldwin only wrote 6, and I would love to have another because they're wonderful. I keep delaying reading the 6th and final novel because I don't want to have the aspect of a life with no more Baldwin novels just terrifies me, so I'm kind of holding off on that. But anyway, yeah, I think this is it's brilliant in its own right as a short story, but I would have loved to get a full novel. Okay, ooh, this is a fun one. So the second question is St. Jerome, an extreme and emotional piece which is dripping with texture and movement. What is one short story you would love to see get the motion picture treatment? And that comes from Labyrinths, a collection by Jorge Luis Borges. And the story in particular is Death and the Compass, which, if you haven't read any Borges, you should, because he writes crazy short stories. You could get you can get all of his works in one edition that's not that expensive, which I own. But, you know, it's all of them. It's kind of big. I had to read this for class this semester, and it's really, really brilliant. So if you want to just get one collection, I highly suggest this one. I loved everything in it. But The Death and the Compass is this crazy short story that's like a murder mystery and kind of a genre detective thing set in a fictionalized city, what I'm pretty sure is Buenos Aires. And ultimately has a lot to do with like philosophy and labyrinths and myth. But it's also this crazy detective story with a twist and kind of a brutal ending. So I think it'd make a really crazy movie. It'd make an insane kind of like True Detective meets, I don't know, a Terry Gilliam movie maybe. Like, it'd be really weird, and I really want to see that. Okay, so number 3, The Vitruvian Man, the sketch of all sketches, and a wonder of the human ability to observe and dissect. What is the short story so masterfully executed and broken down that it forced you to realize that short stories were complete pieces? And I'm going to go with Daydream and Drunkenness of a Young Lady by Isla Specter, which, side note, they just released this in 2015, and it's her complete short stories, most of which have been translated fairly recently. But she's really big in, like, Brazil. She's, like, the author of Brazil. Right here. The first quote on the back says, better than Borges. I don't know about that, but anyway, the story, The Daydream and Drunkenness of a Young Lady, is really interesting. It was one of the first stories that was like, damn, like you can really capture a whole lot. It basically just centers around a drunk woman laying in bed and kind of thinking. But it captures the state of drunkenness really well, along with, you get all these parts of her life and all this backstory and knowledge about who she is from like this one moment or day of her laying in bed drunk and kind of ruminating on her life and other things. But it's really brilliant. I highly suggest reading it. I reread it just before making this. And I want to read a lot more by her, hence going out and getting this fat thing. But yeah, I highly suggest reading that one. And to be honest, for this, I could have copied. There were a lot of Hemingway, like Clean, Well-Lighted Place, Hills Like White Elephant. I chose to keep those most Hemingway off. One, because strip cover lit already did it, and two, because that's the obvious choice for me, because obviously I love Hemingway. But so I was trying to go with authors that are less well known in English speaking circles, and then ones that I just couldn't deny. Okay. So number 4, The Scythed Chariot. Proving that he was a genius, visionary, and true Renaissance man, Leonardo basically invented the tank of modern warfare in a sketch 400 years before its introduction to the killing fields of World War I. What is one lesser-known short story that you think could revolutionize the literary landscape? Okay, so this is kind of a weird one. For this, I went with Notes on the Writing of Horror, a Story by Thomas Lagati. I had to do this for a contemporary lit class. This is a very strange book. It's actually two of his short... Sorry. My dog is just all over my feet right now. It's a short story collection. It's actually 2. And Penguin Classics just released this edition of both of these, which previous to this, they were basically out of print. He's like a super obscure horror fiction writer who only really got published in magazines in the 90s and 80s, and then has been nobody. But he did write a work of like philosophy, which actually went on to inspire the first season of True Detective, a lot of the stuff, philosophical things that came up in that. And then, for whatever reason, Penguin Classics decided to give him the treatment. He's still alive. He's actually the only other 2 living people who are part of this series are Thomas Pynchon and Don DeLillo, so that's kind of crazy. Somehow he got up in their company. But anyway, the story, Notes on Writing of Horror, a Story, is kind of like Stephen King's On Writing, in that the guy is telling you how to write a horror story in 3 styles, and he writes a story in 3 different styles. And then the whole time you find out that this is a horror story all wrapped up in technical specs on how to write a horror story. So it's kind of this like meta thing where he's telling you how to do what he's doing. And he shows you the same story in multiple ways, but it all works to be like a fluid narrative in and of itself. So it's this really kind of weird... not only is it I think it's an interesting format for any kind of story, but because he's doing it in like such a genre-specific way, I think it's also it shows that the genre can be elevated, because a lot of times people will draw that line in the sand where genre fiction can't be like, high-brow stuff. Alright, now we gotta flip the page. Number 5, Head of a Bearded Man. This sketch is supposed by many to be a self-portrait, and is often cited in speculation that the Shroud of Turin is Leo's handiwork. Regardless, it is as mysterious as it is mesmerizing. The brevity of short stories can leave the reader searching for meaning. What is one short story that still stumps you? And I go back to another story in this collection called The Circular Ruins. Every time I read it, I'm just sort of like, is it positive? Is it beautiful? Is it like super pessimistic? I don't know. Every time I read it, I have a different idea of what it means. But it's I'm not even going to tell you what it's about. Just go read it. Go buy this. Read it, or buy his complete things and read more. I'm definitely going to at some point. But yeah, The Circular Ruins, just this... like a dream. It's about dreaming, and it is a dream. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling. Number 6, St. John the Baptist. A work as simple as it is elegant and deep. What is one short story which leaves you flabbergasted and reeling? And for this, I'm going to go with an author who I generally don't like, but The Dead by James Joyce, which is the last story in this collection, Dubliners. If you've ever tried reading Joyce and you just can't, don't feel bad, because I can't either. I've read A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and I wasn't a huge fan. And I have Ulysses, and one day I'll attempt it. Finnegan's Wake, whatever. But The Dubliners is actually like a really, really low-key Joyce work that's actually really brilliant. I think showcases, for people who don't really like his other stuff, this is something you could definitely read. It's just straight up kind of prose. There's not a lot of crazy stuff going on, but The Dead is the final story in this collection, And it basically centers around this dude, and it's sort of like I think the holidays, and he goes to his aging aunts. He has two, they live together, they're home. And it ends with him looking at his wife and realizing that there's so much more to her that he'll never understand and he'll never know. And it's just this really beautiful story, and every time I read it, it's like, it's a great story for like a rainy day or a cloudy day, or for making you think that like, you see people and you think you know them, even people you've known your whole life or whatever, but there's just so much to a person that never gets verbalized, that no one will ever see. We're all strangers to each other, but it also can be kind of refreshing in that, you know, you can never get bored of somebody. Really, they seemingly you may have excavated all their secrets, but you never will or have. So there's always there's some moment or thing that they have experienced that is new and something you can share. It's how you choose to look at it. I choose to look at it positively, but you could very easily look at it negatively. And then we have The Last Supper, a masterpiece which is timeless, controversial, and definitely a touch contrarian. What is one short story that made you question a moral value, belief, or a general pillar of your former worldview? So for this I have two, but they work together in tandem. So I have The Death of Ivan, I say Illich, but I could be wrong, Ilyich, anyway, by Tolstoy, and then The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Hemingway. So both of these things made me question the way I think about death and dying. There's a whole scene when The Death of Ivan Illich, he is dying, and it talks a lot about how his family, they choose to kind of ignore and downplay his illness and why he's dying, and it makes him feel like no one cares. And when there is one person, a peasant, who gives him the dignity and gives his dying and his slow descent the dignity that he craves, and gives him peace by just simply acknowledging that he may be uncomfortable and helping him. And then in The Snows of Kilimanjaro, it's basically the one line where the wife says that the guy's dying, and she says, you know, you're strong, you can fight this. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, and he says, that's stupid, where did you hear that? And I think that's kind of true. It made me think about that. You always have this idea that people can kind of decide when they're going to pass, and they really can't. And so reading both of those really unknowingly changed the way I looked at death. And then, anyway, but yeah, they really made me question what it's like to have someone close to you die, how easy it is to, you know, kind of put it in the back of your head, like let them suffer alone. But how, while it might be uncomfortable, inconvenient for you, it really is a good service to kind of help that person along, and to not blame them if they're not getting better, to make them feel guilty for continuing to be sick or for not getting any better or getting worse. Anyway, the last one is The Mona Lisa. Holy shit. No one knows exactly what it is, but it sure the hell is. What is the greatest short story you've ever read? Now, this would be, okay, so, easy answer, Clean Well Lighted Place, Hills Like White Elephants. I have to say it so that no one thinks I'm crazy. Hills Like White Elephants might be the best short story ever written, because so much happens in so little time. But, and it's beautifully crafted, this masterpiece. But they already took all the good Hemingway stories, you bastards. So besides mentioning them again, I went a different direction. I went with The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, and the final story, The Lives of the Dead. Yeah, that's the final. Yeah, okay. So The Lives of the Dead. And this is a brilliant story. This whole collection, some say it's a novel, but I think it's a bunch of short stories that are just interconnected. Has to do with Vietnam and the fighting of Vietnam, and he does a lot of interesting things in the way he presents it. It sounds very much like a first-person account. The narrator is Tim O'Brien, but it's a fictionalized Tim O'Brien, and then once you know that, and you look at some of the things just as a writer, they're very interesting, but he brings it all home with this last story, The Lives of the Dead, which wraps all of the horror of Vietnam and all of his friends and everything he's seen with this story of a 9-year-old girl that he knew, his first love. He says that who passed from cancer, And this is the image that he kind of ends it with. And here at the end, because this will do it better, better justice than I can. If this doesn't get you to read this or to start reading short stories, I don't know what will. Just stick with me. You can quit now if you don't want to listen to this, but this is worth listening to. It's kind of long, so just bear with me. Lying in bed at night, I made up elaborate stories to bring Linda alive in my sleep. I invented my own dreams. It sounds impossible, I know, but I did it. I'd picture somebody's birthday party. A crowded room, I'd think, and a big chocolate cake with pink candles. And then soon I'd be dreaming it. And after a while, Linda would show up, as I knew she would. And in the dream, we'd look at each other and not talk much. Because we were shy. But then later I'd walk her home and we'd sit on her front steps and stare at the dark, just be together. She'd say amazing things sometimes. Once you're alive, she said, you can't ever be dead. Or she'd say, do I look dead? It was a kind of self-hypnosis. Partly willpower, partly faith, which is how stories arrive. But back then it felt like a miracle. My dreams had become a secret meeting place, and in the weeks after she died, I couldn't wait to fall asleep at night. I began going to bed earlier and earlier, sometimes even in bright daylight. My mother, I remember, finally asked about it at breakfast one morning. Timmy, what's wrong? She said. But all I could do was shrug and say nothing. I just need sleep, that's all. I didn't dare tell the truth. It was embarrassing, I suppose, but it was also a precious secret, like a magic trick. Or if I tried to explain it, or even talk about it, the thrill and mystery would be gone. I didn't want to lose Linda. She was dead, I understood that. After all, I'd seen her body. And yet, even as a 9-year-old, I had begun to practice the magic of stories. Some I just dreamed up, others I wrote down. The scenes and dialogue. And at nighttime, I'd slide into sleep knowing that Linda would be there waiting for me. Once, I remember, we went ice skating late at night, tracing loops and circles under yellow floodlights. Later, we sat by a wood stove in the warming house, all alone, and after a while, I asked her what it was like to be dead. Apparently, Linda thought it was a silly question. She smiled and said, do I look dead? I told her no, she looked terrific. I waited a moment, then asked again, and Linda made a soft little sigh. I could smell our wool mittens drying on the stove. For a few seconds, she was quiet. Well, right now, she said, I'm not dead. But when I am, it's like, I don't know. I guess it's like being inside a book that nobody's reading. A book? I said. An old one. It's up on a library shelf, so you're safe and everything. But the book hasn't been checked out for a long, long time. All you can do is wait. Just hope somebody will pick it up and start reading. Linda smiled at me. Anyhow, it's not so bad, she said. I mean, when you're dead, you just have to be yourself. She stood up and put on her red stocking cap. This is stupid, let's go skate some more. So I followed her down to the frozen pond. It was late and no one else was there. We held hands and skated almost all night under the yellow lights. And then it becomes 1990. I'm 43 years old and a writer now, still dreaming Linda alive in exactly the same way. She's not the embodied Linda. She's mostly made up, with a new identity and a new name, like the man who never was. Her real name doesn't matter. She was 9 years old. I loved her and then she died. And yet right here, in the spell of memory and imagination, I can still see her as if through ice, as if I'm gazing into some other world, a place where there are no brain tumors and no funeral homes, where there are no bodies at all. I can see Kiowa too, and Ted Lavender and Kurt Lemon, and sometimes I can even see Timmy skating with Linda under the yellow floodlights. I'm young and happy, I'll never die. I'm skimming across the surface of my own history, moving fast, riding the melt beneath the blades, doing loops and spins, and when I take a high leap into the dark and come down 30 years later, I realize it is as Tim trying to save Timmy's life with a story. So that's the end, and that's how this book finishes. and all that is incredible. If that doesn't convince you to read at least that, and try out short stories if you aren't really into it, or if you never have, then I don't know how to reach you. As far as tagging people, I hope everyone does it. If you watch this channel and you make videos, do this book tag, because like the dudes at Strip Cover Lid said, short stories are great, they're wonderful, and not enough people read them. And there are many, many more that I wish I could have included that I didn't, and that I would love to know of new people, so please, everyone who sees it, do it. Thank you for watching, and good reading.